Okay, so this talk is about last weekend. There was an Anamora event in the Twin Cities, and I only been to a couple of Anamora events, and they're not the same as an RPM. That's all I got to say about it. But anyway, they wanted me to talk about how I uh, proportioned my layout when I wanted to make it as accurate as possible in the space that I had. And also, there were some things that I wanted to do that really would bend reality considerably. And that was where the winging it part, I think, come from. So anyway, let's see if I can get. All right, if you look at Model Railroad Magazine, Model Railroader, or you talk to people that don't have layouts, but they're going to build one when they retire, this is what they got in mind. If you look at the dimensions of this railroad, and there's a town named after the kid's son, this guy's son, there's an engine facility, there's industrial switching, there's a large yard, there's a multi-track main line, there's helix, and there's a branch line, and this is all only on level 5. But thank you. I never got a snicker at all last weekend. But anyway, when reality strikes, you have to realize you have to look at the space you have and figure out what will fit. And certainly that last one would not have fit. So what I chose was a branch line. My last layout was one town. It was all switching, and I decided I wanted to run a train this time. So I picked this branch line from a photo I've talked about before, and I'll show it again. But I picked 3 towns to model along this branch line. And if we look at the director of industries that we have available, you can see that those 3 towns had the lion's share of business on the branch. Excuse me. Story City, unfortunately, was not a good station, as they used to call it, and they abandoned that relatively early. But if we look at there was a timetable, there were numbered trains on this branch, but because they only ran twice a week, they weren't going to dedicate a crew to it. So they basically every Tuesday and Friday, they would annul this train and schedule it as an extra and call people from the extra board to run it, which is an advantage because when people stop by here to run the railroad, I don't really have to criticize what they're doing because this is their first time on the job. This is their student trip, just like the real guys might have been. And this is basically the dimensions of the railroad and how I fit things in the 3 towns in. But we're going to talk about we're going to start at the end of the line because that's how I started to build the layout. As you can see, this train's on its way to Story City, and they've only got a carload of coal with them. So business was not very good even in the 40s. During the war years, you would think it'd been all right. I put this in here, talks about when the track was abandoned and connection was made to the Northwestern so they could still serve a couple of industries that were the main customers on the line. And it was actually the biggest town on the line, but it had the least traffic. And this drawing shows the yellow line would be the tracks coming in. That red arrow shows this is a 50s, later 50s photograph, and it shows the connection between the Northwestern, which runs north and south, that was put into their industrial track. If we look at the customers here from left to right in the pink, which were the actual customers, there was a cannery, there was an elevator, and then there was the butter tub. And there was also a ramp put in, a machinery ramp that was used to unload automobiles and farm equipment. The 2 maroon circles with the arrows going to it are 2 companies that actually had place on the railroad or near the railroad, but were not customers of the railroad. and we're going to try and make them customers. So basically, this is going to be a tale of two ends of town. You have the town to the west, which I'm going to model as accurately as possible, and the town to the east, which I'm going to wing it on. The photo below, the drawing below shows the cannery and the elevator and the butter tub. And this is a photo of the very west end of town. It's going to be an 8-foot long section. You can see I built the buildings there and the track is going in place, but there's only 4 structures, or the 3 customers and the station here. And when you're going to build the layout, you have to consider what comes first, the track or the scenery or the structures. And I decided to build the structures first. And I had some idea of how big they'd be from that 8-foot section. So I'm going to start by building the depot. This is a photo that was taken back in Iowa Central days. Building is 2-tone paint. You can notice there's a railing around a balcony over the bay window. In this photo taken many years later, that railing is gone, but the balcony is still there. And now it's painted Kelly green, North MSA colors. There's some discrepancies here, and I'm not sure if it really is or not. But in this picture that I know would have been taken in 1946, February, you can see the building looks in pretty good shape. All the windows are in place. The paint looks good. Of course, we're looking at the north side of the building. These 2 photos, one of them is labeled late in 46, and it shows the building in pretty much disrepair with windows knocked out and paint peeling off, really in sad shape. I really don't know if that date is correct or not, but I didn't have the other photo at the time. These are the only 2 photos I had to go by. That and this drawing from the evaluation reports give you some dimensions for the building. And so I made it as best I could from the photos and the dimensions. And I really don't like building bay windows. So it was nice to see that had either fallen off or been torn off or damaged in an accident. And needless to say, it was gone. So I was happy with that. But the building is derelict now, and here's the platform. You can see that it hasn't been used in a while. Next up is the Story City butter tub. And I had to ask myself, what the hell is a butter tub? Well, this is a butter tub. The butter tub company also sold coal. They sold stokers to put the coal into the furnace, and they sold roofing, John Mansfield roofing. And so we got to consider all that stuff. One thing, when I was given this talk last Saturday, it just dawned on me, besides the wood that's coming in to build these butter tubs, it also requires wire and it requires tin. So I've got 2 more carloads of material to bring into the butter tub plant that I hadn't thought about previously. But anyway, here's the butter tubs stacked, being loaded and being put in reefers. And this is the only photo that I know of the butter tub. This is from the Historical Society in Story City. And this is way back before I would ever consider modeling. But it is the only photo I had, so that's the way I built the building. And this shows the building when it's completed. You notice that they added on to the building at one time. And I didn't get that quite right, but we'll talk about that later. Right now, I'm building these buildings, and they're sitting on a module. They're not on the railroad at all. The railroad isn't built yet. Another photo shows I built this coal shed, not knowing what the coal shed looked like that was there, and I wanted to have one with this kind of peaked roof on it, and so I built one for here. This shows a drawing of how the standard version of this was done, and my model. And then behind it is the storage for the lumber or the stokers. and that was John Mansfield product. And I had to manipulate a bunch of signs in PowerPoint in order to make sure that asbestos siding or roofing was on there as a prominent feature. Today, they would kind of frown on that. There's the sign. Next up is the grain elevator. This was, again, the only photo I had of the grain elevator from way back when. And you see how it was along the tracks, and there was a coal shed that went with it, and a corn crib or something attached to the building on one end, and the other end was obviously where they were going to grind feed.
Early on enough.
I mistakenly
just
pardon?
Yeah, that instead of that could be a cob building to collect cobs if they're shelling the corn there. And this photo is early enough that the farmers might be bringing in eared corn, and then the elevator is shelling it.
Yeah, that could very well be, because you see it looks like a corn crib.
Yeah,
as best you can tell from the photo.
yeah. But with the
and
dust collector and stuff, yeah.
Yeah, I misjudged. You know, I figured the guy was 6 foot tall, but at this time period, they were probably more like 5'6" or 5'8". But at least it gives me some dimensions I can go off from when I want to build this place. And the little arrow on the left would show the remains of their coal shed. So a lot of people spend a lot of time making drawings of buildings that they're going to build, scale drawings and different kinds of programs on the computer. And this is all I need. This is my scale drawing, because it actually has dimensions. And these are the pieces, the puzzle pieces that need to be put together to make the building. One thing I wanted to talk about was the spout for loading the box cars. Walthers makes a really nice one with their kits, but that's the only way you can get them. So what I come up with is every once in a while on Saturday night, I'll dress up in high heels and a skirt, and I'll go into Hobby Lobby and wander around the jewelry department. And
there's an operation for that.
Yeah, I know. There's also psychiatrists that'll help you. But anyway, I need other help besides that. Anyway, I found this these little barrel things here, what they call them crimp tubes. And what I did is I took the spout that comes out of the building, drilled a hole in the end of it, stuck a piece of florist wire in there that comes in F&C kits, bent it over, making a U out of it. And then I slid these guys over it and super glued them in place. And that was about as close as I could come to that bucket. It looks like a galvanized pail with no bottoms in them, and they stack them up. And I've always wanted to take pictures of them work. They still had them from back in the 50s and 60s, and I never ever did. But anyway, this is a good representation as best I could with what I had. And then here's the building after it's finished. Couple of photos, two looks like. And then here's the coal shed that goes with it. Close up of the coal shed. I used AK Interactive heavy chipping between coats of paint, and then scraped off the second coat of paint. On the doors, I probably sanded those. I used the AK Interactive heavy worn product on that, and then sanded it to get it off, and probably used some pan pastels, Prismacolor pencils, and maybe some other craft paints also. And then last is the cannery. And again, the only photo that I had available was from the opposite side from where the railroad tracks are at. And so I did the best that I could with that building. But before I got that far, you can see I'm laying everything out on cardboard in 1-to-1 scale. A lot of guys, again, will go to computer programs and they'll build their layouts on their computer screen. And if they can judge where everything's going to fit, good for them. But I have to see it in person. So here I'm bending the track to see how much room, because the track actually had a bend because it went around a turntable that was in that open spot. And to get back to where the cannery is, that was added later. That cannery was not there to begin with. And so that's where the track goes. And now here I'm kind of judging where I want to put everything using that drawing from the magazine and kind of giving my own dimensions and where I was going to put jogs in the wall. And I wanted to be able to spot 2 cars at doors on the building and then be able to unload coal also. Here I actually made a 3D drawing here. I was getting really fancy what I was going to do. And then here's that building when it's finished. The only compromise that I made to my original plan that it really is totally impractical and not going to happen is where you unload the coal. The hopper is at an angle to the auger or the screw going into the building, and that would never happen. Then Jason Clockey goes down to Iowa State, or excuse me, to the Iowa State Historical Society in Iowa City that has the Vincent Mark aerial collection. And he asked for different photographs to look at, and the society being what it is, they still have the original black and white 8x10s glossies, but they will only allow you to take pictures of them. So he took some photographs of the towns he knew I was modeling. And then this shows the top one is from trackside, the bottom one is from the rear. And as you can see, the cannery had a couple of places that were 2 stories up to the track. And also the elevator had a much bigger head house than mine. And if you look at over at the butter tub, there's a sloped roof that I didn't put on that you can just barely make out the remains of their coal shed next to it, which would have been pretty deteriorated. And it was a shed type with a slanted roof like I built for the elevator. Now, if you were to go to Story City today, the only part that's left is that portion that boxcar is in front of that shed at the left of the elevator. Everything else is gone. Tracks are good, but there's still space there where the tracks were. Nobody's built anything there. And then these are a couple of scenes when that portion of the layout is done. This I took because I gave this last Saturday, so the Wednesday before we would have had an op session. So after that op session, I took a few photographs and to put in of the finished product. In the forefront, lower left, where the turntable was, when I did that, I built the trunnion that was in the middle because that was made of concrete. And then I used 2mm grass and surrounded it with 4 and 6mm grass. So it looks like it's actually a depression when it's not. And I left some ties and some cinders where the track would have gone to that table. These photos, this photo on the backdrop is actually from Google Earth of a boulevard in Story City that would have come down to where the railroad is. If you look in the upper photo, you'll see there's a guy stirring the Cisco or the spruce wood that they would use to bend to make the butter tubs out of. And the only guy I had, standing on the top of a ladder is not a big deal unless the MSHA or OSHA guys around. And he was looking up, so I put a guy in the upper window up there that he's yelling at, saying, "You're not stirring the right direction." But anyway, I've also put on my high heels and my skirt, and I went back to Hobby Lobby, and I found some little beads that kind of look like they're more like pumpkins, but they will suffice as I could stack in the building. So when we spot a car there, they've got something to load. And then this would be a view looking west from, I can't remember the name of the street. It's on a street sign, but I can't read it. But this would have been a fairly accurate photograph of what was actually there. Now we're going to bend reality to fit my needs. This is the other end. This is going east from where we just were. And there was if we look at the left, there was a place called Randall Lumber, which was just a small building. And there was a track there, stub end went into an engine house, and there was a ash pit there. And then across the street from that was Martin Jensen's Concrete Products. And if you look further to the right, you'll see there were stock pens there, and there was a stub end track going into the stock pens. What I did was I moved that track over to one block to Martin Jensen's, and then just eliminated that whole block that the stockyards are on. That makes sense. But anyway, this is kind of a drawing that I made at the time. I really wasn't, I thought there was an oil dealer supposed to be here, but I never knew where it was. So I had planned to put it on that track, but just more out. So anyway, they had that turntable was removed in September of 42. They retired that engine house and took up the track. And they built them this machinery platform right where that turnout or that switch used to be. So we can't have that there. We're going to have to move it because we're going to keep that track to supply Randall Lumber. They got rid of the stockyards, like I said, and we're going to use that track to the stockyards for the Jensen concrete. And then this is my version of Jensen concrete from the only photo that I got from the Historical Society down in Story City. And as you can see, there's a track run right in front of the place. So, but I'm sure this place would have probably made single batches of concrete and poured them into individual molds. But we wanted to be able to do something different. So anyway, I decided I would modernize the place, and I put in an elevator for to lift cement up and a tank to hold it. And we also brought in a conveyor to bring aggregate in. And then in that block building, we're going to have a batch mixer like they would have at a ready mix plant, and a block extruder so that we could actually poop out blocks into the main building, and then they would be stacked up there for drying. This photo shows the tank that I made is basically a PCV pipe with Archer rivets on it, and that arrow is to a ductwork that I have no idea why I put it on there, but it's not on there now. The elevator was pretty straightforward from the Walthers kit. I used I don't know why I decided to go ahead and put on a cage around the ladder, because at my time period in 1948 to 50, they wouldn't have had that, but it added a little bit of detail to that. The main thing that I wanted to add was the door at the down at the bottom at the traction, so that they could get in and do any repairs or clean out that they needed to. That was a big deal. The elevators all have to have those. I bought what Walthers calls a modern conveyor, which is really a piece of crap. It shows the bridge work, and it has the pan underneath. There's no belt on it at all. There's no rollers, there's no head pulley, tail pulley, no nothing. It's just base something for you to work with. So I had to go ahead and make my own rollers and put it on, make my own head pulley and tail pulley. I didn't put on the tension roller that would have been in the middle, and because when you start that belt, it's going to move, and the tension roller, and to keep it from ripping apart, would actually lift up and allow the belt to move. But anyway, I used for the belt itself, I used a piece of Scotch tape. And then you have to be able to have a hopper in order to dump stuff in, because it just won't stay on the belt if you try and put it there, unless you're putting it on one shovel at a time. And you have to have a drive at the other end in order to be able to get the stuff up the hill. And then because this is being dumped into a batch mixer, the guy's going to know how many pounds of cement and how many pounds of whatever aggregate he wants to put in there is going to be the proper ratio for the water he's going to add. So he's going to shut off the belt when he gets enough of the aggregate. So that belt is never going to be empty when he shuts it off. And this shows what I was able to gain by adding this extra stuff. Before I was just going to have a box car to load block into. Now I'm going to be able to bring covered hoppers in for unloading cement. I'm going to bring open hoppers in with aggregate. So I've got other uses now for this place than just one car. At the time, the only thing I could find for concrete blocks or cinder blocks or whatever they were making was by Mr. Plaster, and it was a disaster. the stuff is really crude. And they came wrapped in something that looked like somebody wrapped 2x6s around it. And I tried to sand that off, and here I'm drilling a bazillion holes in it so that it looks like there's some kind of a concrete block actually there. And then here those are stacked up in front of the building. Usually I'll stack them up, we'll spot a car there, and then I'll pick them up, put them behind the building, and until it's time to stack them up again to bring another carload in. Next would be that Randall Lumber. As you can see here, there was a building on the street called Randall Lumber, but I don't know anything more about it than that, other than what's in this photograph. This was taken many moons ago, and probably Iowa Central days, because the pickets are still there on top of that balcony. And you can see the engine house right there. And then behind it is that building that was listed as Randall Lumber. So anyway, here's the drawing of the place, and it shows Randall Lumber. It shows the engine house and the ash pit. And what we're going to do is that if you look really closely, if I can get my cursor, no, I can't, because I'm going to move it. Never mind. When you build a lumber yard, the easiest way to do it is to build a Western style barn that most of the lumber yards around here were. If you see one of these barns nowadays anywhere in town, you'll know at one time it was a lumber yard. And I painted a color. I was at, we were doing archaeology on the old Great Western line that went from Faribault, Minnesota to Mankato, Minnesota. And at the town of Morristown, they had a spur that ran to this lumber yard, and it was painted a nice dark yellow color. So I thought I'd mix up something. Turns out to be more of a creamsicle color, but it works out okay. Put this picture in because when you're dealing with small pieces like on the shell story of that building, and you're using small windows and the stuff is 40 thousandths thick, you need a little help cutting the holes out. So I drilled out and then basically just cut between them with my knife. A lot of lumber yards were not on the railroad itself. They might be a block or two away, more toward the business district of town. They always had sheds along the railroad, and the sheds mostly were there to hold bagged material, cement, lime, whatever else they were going to bring in. It could be block salt for animals, something they wanted to keep dry and was a large bulky commodity that they could just drive. When somebody wanted to buy some, they'd send them down here and they'd load it up for them. So this is the roughing in the material. Here's the building, the shed, and the other shed is left over from my last layout. So I thought I'd put it here too. What's nice about what Gene Green a while back talked about the AFEs, and you know, a lot of railroads have historical pieces written about them, very scholarly writings, but they don't really tell you shit about the real railroad. The real railroad, the AFEs are where you get the information that modelers need for sure. And this will tell you exactly what they use to build that machinery platform. They'll even go so far as to tell you that besides the dimensions, how far it was away from the station. And then the top drawing is going to show you where they put it, but we can't have it there because I kept that track. So as you can see on my drawing, my scale drawing that I'm making, I wanted to make sure I had room to spot a car at that lumber shed and also spot a car at that ramp. And then this is the ramp made from the dimensions, but not having a photograph, so that I'm winging it there. And I'm getting ready to lay the track. I use code 55 because it's a branch line, and you know, track is a model too, so that if you want to get it more accurate, you have to go with much smaller code rail. I had a friend or an acquaintance build all of the Fast Tracks turnouts for me. And at the top photo, years ago, Mont Switzer gave me some Central Valley tie strips. And these are for a branch line, so they're spread out a little more. And at the time I was building this, I couldn't get any microengineering code 55 track. But at the scale model supply in St. Paul, they had a bundle of dual gauge track. So I bought that, and then I ripped out that narrow gauge rail, and I used that to lay on top of this. So I was able to get enough track to put this thing down. And as you can see here, I'm starting to lay in the rail. It's held in place with playa bond and then some spikes now and then, but it's always held in place. I've never had any issues with it. And since this was, well, it's 7 years old. This would be a photo looking east at the lumber yard, the machinery platform, and Jensen's concrete products. Now this photo here is between, well, you can see that for a placeholder, the ramp is there, but this area I just left vacant basically. And Lance Minheim needs a cigarette after he looked at this picture, and he had to put it in one of his books because it's one of those things where he likes modeling little or nothing, and this is about as close to nothing as you can get. I do remember when I was in grade school, a friend of mine's grandparents lived across the street. They had an apple tree in the backyard, and they had an old, I think, a 37 Ford under the apple tree. So when you go over to Train Fed and I visit all of these cottage industries guys that are selling all these bags of detail parts, I would always buy them. And some of them I couldn't use, but I can always find a place to dump them somewhere along the railroad. And this shows the lumber yard. We were looking at one the other day, a picture of one that actually had picket fence sections and basically clothes planks, or they wouldn't be called planks, they would be close enough, sections that were laid out. So I'm going to make some of those and put back here too. But the main draw here are the tar lugs that are behind the one open gate. They're just a cylinder of tar with paper around the outside that they can just throw in the cooker when they're doing roofs, and it'll burn off that paper, no problem. We lived next door to a builder supply in Mesa City when I was a kid in grade school. And one hot weekend, summer weekend, we went out there, some of my friends and I, and we were clear to the back of the lumber yard, just like this one. And we were digging around, and that tar was soft. So we would dig out some, chew on it like gum, and it'd lose its flavor, and we'd pick off another piece and chew on that. And eventually I went home, and my mother took a look at me and threw me in the bathtub. And you actually use Babel, which is like Comet today, and a scrub brush. And my grandfather from Marshalltown was visiting, and he could hear me screaming, and he would have swore that she was peeling the outer layer of skin off of me to try and get the tar off. But I guess I was pretty pink. Pardon?
She was taking a layer of skin off.
Yeah, she did. Yes, she did. Anyway, and then this is the Jensen place that I've one thing that I want to show you here is they would use straw on bricks. Any carload of bricks, they use it packed with straw, and they would do the same with the block. And so I've got some bales of straw there that they would use to pack it. And then here's those idiot things. Now, it's these, I have found out that Finero and Camerlengo, F&C, they make resin concrete blocks, and I bought some, and they're beautiful. And one of these days, I'm going to get around to replacing this crap with those guys because they're really nice. Looking at the other end of this place, just for cutes, shits and grins, we used to say at work. I had one pile of aggregate put too close to the fence, and it kind of broke through just for break up the monotony of the fence line. Here we go. The guy using the bucket machine there, he's never going to make a perfect shot into that copper. So we got the rest of the crew out here cleaning it up afterwards. We'll move on to Roland. This picture again is from Vincent Mart from Iowa State Historical Society. And it was taken in the 70s. And what I've circled here are the actual things that would have still been there back in around 1950 when I modeled. This is the photo that really started the whole thing. That train backing up on that hump track really was the key feature there. And one thing about like this photo here, it tells you exactly how they would have operated this railroad. When they're going west, which would be away from us towards Story City, this track that they're backing up on is a facing point stub switch, where the track with the cars on is a siding. So what they would do is set out the cars that they were going to leave here at Roland, and then on the way back, that's when they would spot them all. And you can see there's a car and the caboose left on the main line that would be coming back from Story City. Now, what I'm pointing out here is there was a produce company that poultry processor. You can just see a little bit of the white building at the lower right. There's a reefer spotted there. And there's a stockyard that's in pretty decrepit shape. And then after that, there's Johnson Elevator down there at the end. There's this funny looking one on the right and a more modern design, or the standard crib design, on the left. And what had happened is, I think they built that one on the left and then destroyed the one on the right. And then there's the lumber sheds along there that they would put coal in, the ones with the numbered doors, and then bag material in these other guys. Anyway, when in the time I'm going to model, what I'm going to do is there's two elevators I'm going to add that weren't on this old drawing. One is the Johnson, with the Johnson elevator across from it. There's another elevator at the other end of the block that's not on this, co-op elevator. I'm going to make those lumber sheds. I'm going to do the poultry processor. And where the lumber yard is, I'm just going to build a movable chute. And a long story, but the chute doesn't go there. But I didn't know that at the time. Then the Standard Oil I'll build. The old elevator, I have to build that because it's so cool looking. And then there's those long lumber sheds, and I'm going to build a portion of those and the depot. To the east of all of this is Marshall Canyon. And as you can see here, there were two tracks in Marshall Canyon, but I only have room for one track. And this is a photo of the Marshall Canyon. It's the building is still there. It's pretty decrepit. The roof is caved in. But I took a series of photographs and then merged them all together and come up with this kind of a conglomeration of squeezing it all down to fit the space I had. Again, I wanted to lay everything out one to one. So as you can see here, I'm using a template for fast tracks to get the angles right for my switches. And then I'm making space for the buildings because I'm using actual freight cars to spot there, because it doesn't matter how long the track is if it doesn't have room for the cars you want to use. You have to think of that before you think of just, oh, I'm going to make a siding 6 feet long. No, you need to make it so many car lengths long. The railroad always went by car lengths. If we look at this from the east end going west, we have the Hagelin produce, which we're going to be able to spot a reefer at. And we have that portable chute for a stock car. And then at the elevator, we're going to be able to spot two cars. In the middle, we have be able to spot a tank at the oil company. And I've got a coal car, gondola of coal for where the sheds were. And then the other elevator at the back, I want to be able to make room for two cars. So basically they'll spot it like it is now, and then roll one car down when they load that Burlington car. So you always have to have room for more cars than you think you do. And then at the very end, what they would do is take that, it's a Penske X29, I think, and roll that down on the other side of Main Street so they could load that Burlington car. On the front track, that elevator was built right at the end of the track for some goofy reason. Probably the only room space they had. The Wabash car spot there. And I never could figure out why they would build something to spot one car, but they're actually able to two. So here's the drawing after it's completed. Got my building sizes, got my car spots, got the track where it's going to go, and now I'm transferring that information over to reality Sometimes it transfers like you want it to, sometimes it comes close. Here I've used some ceiling tile and some cork for shims to get that hump track in there. And if you really look at this, going down there and walking around, even though nothing's there anymore, you can see what the railroad did is there was actually a ridge that went across there. And they actually cut that ridge out for their main line and their passing siding or their customer siding. And being as all their customers were already on this high ground, they just put the track up there to where the customers already were. This photo I included because there was a fella about here a couple of years ago that grew up in Story City. He has photos that he took in Northwestern days of the railroad in town. And what was interesting is his dad was a pastor in that church, and he lived in this white house with striped awnings on it, which I thought was interesting when I showed him this photograph. But the real reason for showing this photograph is if you look in the background, you can see how tall those two elevators were and how the one on the high ground is much taller than that old one on the other side of the tracks. So that's what basically what I did was built the old one first. And then I used cardboard silhouettes to try and gauge the size of the one that I wanted to put on the end of the stub track in Johnson Green. And then this is a photo of that I took to kind of represent this actual photo. I didn't put near as many cars in it because you just don't have the right angles with the camera in order to be able to do all that. And then this shows some of the stuff that I got, the lumber sheds, that stock chute, the Standard Oil. There were corn cribs there. I got the corn crib on the back. This shows what I am putting on the back as part of the oil dealer and those corn cribs. And as you can see that I probably got 4 or 5 photographs there that I've stuck together, and I'll just cut those back, the sky off of it and use those guys, do them on the backdrop. This is that elevator that was owned by the co-op. They built a rectangular crib annex onto it. And this is taken from not away from trackside. This building across the back here is actually a fertilizer building. And it's good that I know that because I have plans that I'll talk about here in just a minute. And almost, I just noticed this, it looks like they're either getting ready to put in an LP system there. They've got the cradles in for the tanks. That's my guess. Anyway, this is that photo of the track side of that building. It's going to look like, I think it's the track side. But what I want to do is I want to take this old elevator that from Johnson's, and I want to make that into fertilizer place. We're going to say that the fertilizer company in the farmers co-op, instead of waiting till 54 to get into full fertilizer, they wanted to try that out ahead of time, thinking it was an up-and-coming commodity. So they leased this building to use the whole granular fertilizer. And the only thing they had to do was put a screw out under the track so they could unload hopper cars. Moving on, we go to Zearing now. In Zearing, this again is a 70s photo. I actually have taken photos of a couple of things here in Zearing that were still around in the 80s or probably in the 80s when I took photographs. But you can, the only thing I have circled here that I'm going to mess with is this elevator down here in the corner. This is kind of a busy track diagram, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time looking at it, other than to show that it has, there are 2 sidings here, one on the either side of the main line. The main thing of interest here is the Coney vacuum, or the mobile dealer must have been the last guy in town because there wasn't room for him to spot cars on the siding that was taken up by Standard Oil. So they had to put their standpipe on the north side of the tracks over by the Sinclair dealer and then pipe underneath to their pump house, which was not uncommon for them to do things like that. But here I'm laying out Zearing, I think I've got like 9 feet to make it for Zearing. And I've saved the feed mill from my last elevator, and I'm going to use that to represent the feed mill that was here. And the other styrofoam blocks are going to be just for the buildings. Looking at it from the other end, there were 3 oil dealers down here. I've got some buildings left over, this Red Star oil left over from my last layout. So I'm just kind of using it as placeholders. I recycled those tanks into something else here on the layout. And then Jason Clocky recycled that warehouse on his layout. Well, this shows the track is in place, and I've got the station built. The other little building is just a little plastic shed picked up somewhere along the line. I'm building the elevator to go with the feed mill. The only thing that I'm doing different here is there were 2 elevators in the feed mill that in a headquarters building that all belong to Pulley Grain. But unfortunately, I have really nice graphics that I had custom made on that feed mill that matches the one that was here in town. And so Pulley Grain is getting bumped for Farmers Co-op. And then here are the Pulley Grain elevator will still remain at the end, the older elevator, and the newer elevator is now going to be attached to the Farmer Co-op feed mill. So in this photo, you can never have too much craft paint. But anyway, this is that elevator that's at the west end of town. And again, it has a crib style annex. And I just built one of those over at Roland. I didn't want to make another one. And I've always been so I did build the elevator as best I could to match the prototype. But I've always loved those steel plate bends that you see around elevators, and nobody will ever make me any models of them. So I ended up talking the Clever Models guys into making me a printed one. And so they printed out those bends. I think I gave the dimensions, and they made these prints, and I had them, went to Staples probably, and had them printed on some heavy paper. So here I'm wrapping around some pipe to make bends to replace that crib style elevator. So here these guys are in place. You got to have a walkway to get out to them to measure anything or do any repair work. Then you have to have a screw come out and a conduit to the motor on the screw. The actual stands that are holding up the screw are from their supports for slope sheets on reefers. And I had a couple residents left over so that you never throw stuff away. So it's recycles in here. And you always got to have spillage. There's never going to be a time when you don't have spillage when you're handling material. And then this is what the building looks like when it's set in place. So here we've got the office for Farmers Elevator now, the big Farmers Elevator, their feed mill, and then the old Pulleys elevator down at the other end. And then if we look at this prototype photo, you can see the building. That's all I had to go by for that office building. And the big elevator, the feed mill, and the little elevator at the other end. Just back to the same photograph again. Looking at it from the other direction. What's interesting here, this I think was probably the first train I run on the layout or through Zearing anyway. If you, again, there's only 2 photos I have of the railroad during their time at Zearing. And the last one, the engine was setting down by the depot facing the other direction on the main line. Now in this photo, it's actually on that north siding, and they're spotting cars at those elevators, which would give you the impression that for whatever cars were for Zearing were set out on the way out and spotted on the way back. And again, back to that first photo again. And then last thing I built there were the 3 oil dealers. And one of the few questions I got last weekend was, why are those box cars there? Well, they're for the elevators. you know, and they weren't stored there because there are a couple of Northwestern, but there's also an IC and a Rock Island, and they aren't going to pay demurrage to store cars for another railroad. So those are waiting to be loaded at the elevators. And then this is a photo of those three elevators, or three oil dealers. One of them's got a car. You know, I thought at the beginning, how many cars do I need to bring here? Well, I've got a mobile car and there's a mobile dealer. I've got a Sinclair car, there's a Sinclair dealer. I've got a couple of UTLX cars and there's a standard dealer. So you only need, I've got another standard dealer or Roland. So 4 tank cars is all I need. And then there's another photo of that same photo, just going back and forth for comparison purposes. Another one that's looking at it from the other direction. Not quite finished here. I think I've thrown a lot more debris in the area since then. You can never have too much junk sitting around. And that's the end of it. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
All right. Thank you, Clark.
Hey, somebody's still awake. Yay.
Yeah.
Nice
Good
job,
stuff.
Clark.
Well,
Very
thank you.
nice. Beautiful modeling.
By the way, if you go to Michael's instead of Hobby Lobby, you don't wear a skirt or high heels, and they stop making you wear lipstick.
Oh, that's why we don't have a Michaels.
Oh,
Clark
Okay.
likes to wear lipstick and high heels.
Yeah, you're taking that modeling a little too seriously.
Only when Bob tells me to, when we're going out onto RPMs together.
got it.
The Hobby Lobby people are a Sunday go to meeting church going kind of people. That's why they dress up.
Oh, that's why it is. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think they would frown on what I just told them, talked about. one
Yeah,
day.
definitely. All right. Well, thank you, Clark. That was a wonderful presentation. Next week, we have Keith Coleman lined up, and he's going to be telling us about some of the techniques he uses for realistic outdoor photography. So don't miss that. After that, our schedule's open. So if anybody wants to get signed up to present in June, just let me know and we'll get you on the schedule. But Clark, that was a great presentation. Thanks for stepping in, and everybody have a great evening.
Yep.
Weekend.
Memorial Day
guys.
Everybody
weekend.
else, have a good one.
See you next week.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.